There are moments which mark your life, moments when you realize nothing will ever be the same, and time is divided into two parts, before this and after this. Now, sometimes you can feel such a moment coming. That's the test. Or so I tell myself. I tell myself that at times like that, strong people keep moving forward anyway, no matter what they're going to find.
Come closer.
Transmission will start in 5
I want to talk to you. I'm going to tell you an astounding story.
It's almost like a symphony of different elements that are very carefully brought together to provide exquisite enjoyment.
Reposing on lush carpets, surrounded by perfume and music, the good life.
The right to rule the world.
Who debated the nature of God, the subtleties of philosophy, or the most recent mathematical revelations from the good life.
An ancient prophecy told
While they dined on spiced delicacies served on Chinese porcelains.
the greatest power on earth. Deep thunder rolls around its shores.
What is this?
That's an ancient puzzle that contains the meaning of life.
There's conspiracy here. There's conspiracy here.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes. Welcome, everyone. It is, ladies and gentlemen, story time, chapter 16. If you've been waiting all week, so have I. It's going to be an interesting one. And before we kick off anything, I just want to appreciate some of the fan mail we've had with a few suggestions. We're always open to them. So I do try to squeeze a lot of things in. I do that, definitely. And as always, I'm never accurate. Not never, but I'm not always accurate. And so, as always, do your research. I'm a rabbit hole generator, and you can spend a lot of time going through that information. But I do appreciate the comment made about maybe trying to either do a story time more often and keep it a bit shorter than these 3-4 hour long story times. So I hear that. But sometimes that's where our adventures take us. And to those new of you joining Storytime for the first episode of your viewing, let me just tell you, you're in for a treat. What do we do here? Basically, we take a little bit of the present and a little bit of the past, and when you kind of compress these two things, a bunch of mystery pops out. Truly, we don't have the full story straight. And so it's always a pleasure to bring up all these interesting features of our common path through history that sometimes don't line up and require many more deeper questions to be asked. And so I am your host this evening, Friendly Euphoria from South Africa, good old Mama Africa, and Johannesburg is our place we're beaming from. We have some electricity, so let's make good use of it, shall we? As we plunge through the internet, deep into the chaos of humanity, it might not seem that humans are at a major risk. Many of us have very stable lives, and that's a good thing. It's nice to be able to raise families and have a solid source of income, but many don't have that kind of security, and more, this is becoming a problem for us. Mismanagement seems to be the lighter end of it, but pure corruption is on the other end. And what we see basically is that our taxes and our voting and our efforts to try and create some kind of mechanism that looks after us whilst we pursue our life goals has somehow hijacked itself, and it's no longer us in the driving seat. These powers and mechanisms have enveloped themselves in a whole bunch of other law shrouding kind of obfuscation and all kinds of other mischievousness. And that leaves us with a lot of work to do to kind of bring that back into our not only understanding, but under our control. So Storytime, although we plunge through different rabbit holes, as it were, we always try and ground ourselves where we can. As I said, I'm not here to convince you of anything, just to point out some very interesting factors that might interest you if you kind of have the time to dot those lines. Often we don't with our day-to-day lives, but that's the whole point of this program. It's just to kind of, straighten those bumps out and line it up so that it all kind of forms the right picture. Yeah, nice high-resolution photo of information, as it were. And with information comes wisdom. That's really the aim of Storytime. As I said, I'm not here to convince you, but if I can at least connect a few dots and a few more things make sense to you, or are questioned and dismissed outright, that's the whole point of deductive reasoning. If you hold something up to the light and there's not any truth to it, then you know that that's not useful to you. And it's only through conversation that you get to practice these questions and ideas. So this is Storytime 15, following Storytime 15. We're going to touch a little bit on the continuation of government. So following from the previous program, we're going to have a little bit of an overlap. But Storytime 16 essentially is going to be looking at two big things. Our main topic this evening is I do want to talk about this concept of collapse. We often have a lot of fun here, and we make a lot of jokes of the politicians and the criminal syndicates that they form, and these vacuous deep state people that just have no morals and brains sometimes, and sort of send us off a cliff edge every now and again. We do make fun of that, and it's all fun and games. That's true. But sometimes we also need to tackle very serious information, and very serious information sometimes needs good grounding. And so whilst we are in essence talking about, on the one hand, breakaway civilizations and sections of humanity by means of things like continuation of governments, we have some interesting news there. We're also going to be looking, on the other hand, at where this kind of pressure upon sovereign states comes from. What creates this chaos that we often have no control over, that spontaneously arises? And I want to make this point because as things accelerate and as political pressure increases, wherever you are in the world, there is, let's just say, greater cowboy-like behavior from everyone. On every end, extremes are being pushed in every direction. And that makes the ride of society a very bumpy one. And so sometimes that's a normal process of change, societal and, cultural. But other times, I'll say it outright, violence is forced upon us. And it's not normal people that do this. Let me just be clear. If you look at statistics, many people just want to have the option of collaboration and friendship and good times, good vibes, as opposed to conflict and physical altercation. Even in its most extreme sense, there's very few of us that really want to see just everything burn around us. That feeling comes to us often enough, but it comes to us often because there's something great that we love that has been unduly tampered with, sometimes destroyed. But I mean, everyone has their own journey and their own interpretations. What I'm trying to say here is essentially that humans don't really want violence and conflict. We want to get on with things. We want to make things beautiful. We want to express ourselves and find ways to become more than we were the day prior. Knowledge, wisdom, and endeavor kind of spur us through time so that we collaborate and make fantastic technologies and societies. At least that's more or less my opinion of the matter. Now, we can track many times in the past where, whilst we're having our civilian lives, going about minding our own business, as it were, there are forces that, as a hammer, let's call them this kind of archetype, they're a hammer. And so every problem to them is a nail. And they will use that nail and whatever means they can as a hammer to get it, uniform, so that everything is hammered in, because that's the function. Now, change that metaphor to a military whose objective is kinetic destruction for a political end. That's basically when politics fails. Or succeeds, in some cases, very rare, but it's politics by other means, let's just put it that way. An extreme form of it. And so, when things like wars and conflicts and civil unrest break out, this is because of a breakdown of many mechanisms of our society. That is true, no doubt. But what happens when these things are funded by these militaries, by these intelligence agencies, by these unfriendly governments and conglomerates that are international in their scope? What happens to us then? We've also been asking a lot of questions recently through a lot of the UAP disclosures, we've been thinking a lot about exopolitics. How do we relate to other intelligent life forms that might come from other planets, solar systems, whatever the case is, dimensions? This is a possibility. What happens to our relationship when we need to get along or can't get along? How are we as a species to interact with that? These are important questions because if we don't have control of that, what you have then is the military's idea of, oh, well, let's shoot everything down first and ask questions later. If we can't control it, it's an enemy. If it doesn't do what we say and respect our authority, then clearly it becomes a target. Must be something that comes under the control of the military might or whatever military thinks that it has authority to, do such things with. Now, I'm going to try and put this all in a nice framing for you, because we've got some interesting info to jump into, and try and use that info to explain why are we seeing some of the civil unrest that we do. I'm not saying all of it. I'm not saying that this or that exact, let's say, situation in this or that country is the result of direct military intervention. But we will look at some historical examples where we do know that there have been military interventions. And that would really kind of ground the matter for me, and I hope for you too. Because in my mind, reminding myself of just the lengths that militaries will go to use any kind of tool, in this case fear, and actual kinetic force, let's call it, aka violence, to achieve some other kind of end that the people have not voted for, have no inkling or understanding that it's even happening. Just until the other day, a lot of this stuff was sort of smushed and schmarred in a lot of classification and national security shrouding. In other words, we knew that there was information there, but it was very difficult to kind of access what the true scope is of intelligence programs and operations. So we have a few examples that we'll have a look at going forward. This is important because, as people not being prone to, as the Romans did once upon a time, be peaceful civilians and then at the drop of a hat suddenly join the army if suddenly there was an invading force or something like that, that's completely different. We now enjoy division of labor and the kinds of things that make a modern society. And that means that the law and order should function and that there should be mechanisms to protect us. And, people interested in that should take part in that, not be coerced or forced. Now, what I'm trying to say here, basically, again, just to really put the point under the microscope, is that as civilians, we are not used to looking at things through military forms. We might do a year or two or more of military service, and in that case, that's a different story. But I'm talking about the general population. People, coding programs and teaching people and, flying airplanes and whatever the case is, whatever job you might think of that isn't completely, in and from the military itself. There's a different kind of way of looking at things. And again, there can be very many people involved in the military that don't have the same lethal point of view. Not everyone is a combatant. Let's just also be clear about that. But at the same time, we're not aware of that kind of lethality. It's not in our nature. It's supposed to be reserved for the most extreme cases. And it's something that is important to us now because sometimes that operation, that military endeavor, gets pushed on us. Because at the end of the day, the political machine and the whole machine of humanity is the people that kind of run it. The average people, the whole many billions of us that just want to get by, just want to have a good time and share our experiences with others. That seems to be the important thing. Now, the first bit of news I want to get into is specifically around our good friend General von Herk. It's such a joy that we've put together so many episodes of Storytime that finally we have a bit of a basis that when we say von Herk, we already understand that this was the now former head of the NORAD and Central Command and defense systems for their missile defense and all of that for the North American continent. And also the commander-in-chief that would basically become the de facto, what would you call him? Tyrannical military leader that now suspends a constitution and gets the collaboration of both Canadians and Americans. Are now just using North America as an example. But there's a collaboration there for what they call a continuity of government, that basically when politicians ask about this kind of thing, the continuity of government, only a few people have ever gone on record and spoken about it. And although there is some policy documents, a lot of it is secret because it's basically how a country will deal in cases of crisis and emergency. And this is going to come up because whilst we're looking at civil unrest in a certain sense, the two are closely linked, because if you are dealing for whatever emergency, be it alien, natural, or civil, civil unrest, it seems that these methods are in the hands of notorious people that can, in all three of these areas, provide things like false flags and fool us into thinking a civil unrest is a natural thing, or a protection against these evil ETs that, come into our airspace with impunity, or whatever the case is. They will make up a narrative and then become the solution for that problem and make a bunch of money out of it. So just to get our head straight, because that's really the direction I want to dig into here, is looking at General von Herk and squaring off this problem that he poses with his new, he's got a new, he's been sidelined, and now there's a new head of the continuation of government. So we're going to look at this man as well. And again, looking at continuation of governments superseding laws puts it at that level where it can start to do illegal things and create even states of tension, which we'll look at later, and violence amongst civilians, and misinform them and psychological operation them simply for the purpose of whatever they deem national security or some military objective end. It's a bit of a mess. So this is the importance of trying to understand it. So let's pop into our very first article. Now, let's first talk about Mr. What should I say? General von Herk. Now, this guy here, what to say about him? I mean, in his opinion, he feels that he's not getting enough authority, because now there's a space force that has, in some sense, superseded some of the functions that he had as commander of NORAD. And so we'll look at an interesting article, but just a little bit about the man here. You'll see is a general born in 1962 of the United States Air Force, who serves as commander in both the United States Northern Command, that's NORTHCOM, and the Aerospace Defense Command. Previously served as director of the Joint Staff in 2019 to August 2020. So von Herk was born in Kentucky, in Missouri. Now, that's an interesting place because there's a lot of UFO activity being documented in and out of these places. We might have some time to look at some of the interesting data that's being presented to us from these scientific research councils. They track the the UFOs coming in, and there's patterns to it. They use AI to kind of figure out times and directions, and yeah, places like Missouri not only come up there, but much sooner as well. So this is now an article from the Air Force here, reading about his great involvement in the military and his endeavors, resulting in, let's see here, he graduated from Missouri, had diverse backgrounds that include operational and training assignments in the F-15, F-35, B-2, B-1, so, bombers and fighters and all kinds of things. Basically, this is just a resume of how wonderful this man is and all the things he's done to serve his country. So, not much there. But if we start to look at things like this article, this is from Air and Space Forces magazine. And the heading goes forward to say, Biden taps Air Force's Gilot as new NORAD commander. So I'm going to read a little bit about this because, as you can see, Biden has made some changes to the strategic defense configuration of the United States. Now that there's a Space Force, it has a few more functions that now supersede things like the Air Force. And people like General von Herk had a bit of a problem with that, so we'll read a bit about this. Let's have a look. So, President Joe Biden nominated Air Force Lieutenant General Gregory M. Gilot to add another star and succeed General Glenn D. von Herk as head of U.S. Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command. The nomination was among several high-level nominations announced May 31st. Now, why does that sound like it surprises me? Because it does. If memory serves me, we did a whole episode of von Herk. Not a whole episode, but he was featured quite heavily in that episode because he was recently instated, and I believe in 2020, as 2019-2020, as the head of NORAD and the continuation of government, continuity, I believe they call, continuity of government machinery. And that interests me greatly because that's basically 2 years, and now you're changing one of the highest commanders in your entire military strategy. Because remember, continuation of government, or continuity of government as they refer to it in America, deals specifically with what to do in cases of even things like decapitation strikes from a nuclear adversary. So in other words, the kind of destruction that would be global and possibly extinguish all life on Earth. This is the level of planning that they go through, and that's why they think in their minds suspension of freedoms gives them the right to do that, which maybe could be argued, but the problem is that there is a delinking between society and this thing we call continuity of government. So we'll read a little bit about M. Gilot, but this is what I would like you to keep in mind, that what we're dealing with here is something that, in fact, let's pull up a video here of Hawaiian Senator Inoue replying to one of his colleagues. Now, I believe this was back in the 60s, late 60s, and they were basically asking one of the commanders, Oliver North. He had lied to Congress and all kinds of things, and so he was, you know, being put under questioning by the congressional hearing at the time. And this was an interesting comment, and just to kind of put this idea of how the military thinks the Constitution is something that can be swept aside and people's rights can be swept aside, and how humanity goes forward is their right to understand, know, and plan. And we have no legal, political, or, in their opinion, no how to even address the problem. So therefore they think that they are the ones that can do as they please, even above laws. So let's see if I can call this up without blasting our eardrums. One moment for me, please. Okay, great. This is a very interesting video here. And can you hear this? I hope so.
North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
Well,
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area.
Okay, hold on, wait. Let's watch that again. Watch the body language of a few of the people shift in the room the moment the question is asked. One more time.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area. So may I request that you not touch upon that, sir?
Lol. So you can see there the military's spokesperson is about to respond, but luckily he gets saved by Senator, I believe his name is Daniel Inouye, and he basically is read into certain things and says, look, if you want a special counsel, maybe you can hear about this, but I request that you don't even say that word, continuation or continuity of government in public. Like, what the hell are you doing? So watch the end bit.
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency.
Sorry, again, I just want to say, look at all the scuttling around.
A contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was, but I wanted to get his
I most
confirmation.
respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
Yes. So that's what we're talking about here. We're really referring to the suspension of your rights and my rights and everyone's rights. If you've ever seen, I'm trying to think how to explain it. If like a teenager had to ask me, like, what would that picture look like? The closest thing I can think of is, because, you know, there is a lot of psyoping in Hollywood and the media. But if you think about your favorite zombie movie, let's take 28 Days Later. Let's take, what's the one with Will Smith? Anyways, whatever zombie movie you want. Okay. You will see that whatever's left of the surviving ruins is like military checkpoints, you know, armored personnel carriers. You can see that the military tried to keep control and was the last bastion, and then, you know, they either whatever in that particular story they get overrun, and at the end of the day, and often in these stories you also find out that they are the culprits releasing these kinds of pathogens or whatever the case is. But that's a movie. What I'm trying to point out about that movie and many others like it is that the military is always kind of put into our minds as this last line of defense, and whatever they do justifies the means. And I'm here to tell you, it does not. Every person is a free and special soul that everyone needs to be protected. And if we made decisions about how we would want to relate, not just between ourselves and with other countries, we often find that resolution and diplomacy are much better tools than just what we're doing now. And continuation of government comes square into this, because if a military were to create enough chaos, then FEMA kicks in, then continuation of government kicks in, then martial law kicks in, and then again, that's looking at America, but you know, they have a good transparency in a certain sense, so it's nice to kind of roll down all the information available to us publicly from them. But this is really what I want to kind of point out, and we're going to go a bit further. Let's finish reading a little bit more of this article. Now, if confirmed by the Senate, so it's not completely in the bag, Gillard will succeed Van Herk, who has led Northcom and NORAD since 2020. So again, a very short space of time. You're not supposed to swap out generals like that. Politicians have limited time limits, but military generals remain 4 stars for as long as they have the right to wear that. You know, they've earned it. And in that time, Von Herk has advocated for more over-the-horizon surveillance capabilities. That's basically from one country to another, long distance, and warned about potential gaps in domain awareness. The potential gaps in domain awareness are the objects. Yes, the objects that got shot down. Von Herk came onto our radar specifically for this comment. Oh, I wonder if I've got it. I'm sure I do. He came onto the radar of StoryTime because here is the commander of the continuation of government at the time that said, you know, we've shot something down, and the reporter asks, well, was it a UFO from, you know, aliens and stuff? And he says, well, I'm not going to rule that out. I'll let other people decide that. And I mean, you're the commander. Of course, you're going to know what those people decide or think or whatever the case is. Let's see, do I have it? I'm going to have to give it a little bit of a hint, I think. I do think, yes. Alright, but in the meantime, we just want to finish off this article here, and then I'll see if I can spot it for y'all. So, Von Herk's warnings took a new urgency when the Chinese spy balloon transited the entire continental US. Earlier this year, examinations revealed that other Chinese balloons have slipped undetected past NORAD's radars in previous years, and we called straight BS on that. The Japanese were sending balloons across to the Americans in the times of like Pearl Harbor, and there was laws and radar and procedures and protocols for that sort of business, so we didn't buy that for a second. And then that it goes undetected because they need to adjust their sensors to electrical optical devices in the sky. I don't buy it for a second. And in fact, we've seen so many testimonies. In fact, the last one we looked at was the one guy from Dr. Stephen Greer that says that in the... How did he describe it? He says in the Antarctic, there is that detection system that's supposed to pick up neutrinos, but it doesn't only detect electromagnetic signals like things like from neutrinos and whatever, but it can also transmit, and this makes it a way for some kind of faster than light communication and air traffic control for a craft if they were to be able to do these kinds of mind-bending physics of, you know, traveling at Mach 40 and doing right angle turns and whatever the case is. This system would be able to detect and push that forward. So if they've got that kind of technology, at, you know, let's assume that that's conspiracy theory still, even though we have people giving congressional testimony about that. and Congress is having hearings and gathering information, there still are very advanced systems and satellites that, remember, they need to detect missiles that come in. And these days, when these missiles come in, it's not like just one missile. It's just a carrier missile that then has these MIRVs, these multiple re-entry vehicles, which basically are smaller nukes that then burst off and then make it very difficult for air defense to shoot at these multiple nukes coming in. So they need to detect something like 12 of these things coming across from whatever angle at any moment. And you're telling me they can't spot a balloon? You see, you're getting me all worked up here. Let me move forward. Good old NORAD. Good old NORAD. So von Herk, as I said, comes onto our radar because he makes this comment about, possibly what we shot down was a UFO. It was octagonal. Possibly. I don't know if he said that, but the news reported that the one in question was octagonal. Very strange shape to make your balloon, right? Moving forward. So this is interesting news for all of us across the world. That Gilot is, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is going to be taking over from General von Herk, and that he's going to now be this commander of this machine called continuation of government. It's very, very interesting. We need to dive a little bit deeper into that because, as I said, militaries cannot easily be trusted because they see everything in the way a military does, which is like, well, you point your gun at it and then, the problem's solved. I'm sorry to say that's not how it works all the time. And again, if we have no control over that, then there's really no hope because it's a hydra that we lose control over. That is the important thing to kind of keep in mind here because, as I said, not only can they not be trusted for putting together plans in mass cataclysm, and again, we shouldn't be treated like children. If there's a mass cataclysm, even through natural events, here in this commentary of StoryTime, we've looked at how the CIA kind of buried the Adam and Eve story that talks about global cataclysm that happens in cycles because of magnetic pole shift and solar activity. I don't know. Astrological things, let's just say. And what you end up with is, if these things are real, like even an asteroid, if this was coming to us, would they warn the president before they warned the people? How long would the president have to evacuate his family before other families were told? I mean, I'm not trying to point out any president or world leader here, but do you understand the question I'm kind of asking? And that's asking it in very sort of layman's terms. The point is that not only can militaries be hidden in their objectives, meaning that they can break the trust that we put in them because they've got the plans and we don't, but they're also not equipped to tell us how we should be running the future existence of humanity, in my opinion. That's much better said by the people who are much more focused on being human than being machines of war and destruction, which is not natural to us, in my opinion. So, to really try and hammer this point home, and as I started with the introduction to this story time, we're going to take a little bit of a dark turn here. And for me, it is at least a little bit dark, because I have a long family history that comes straight from Italy. And Italy, like the rest of Europe, has thousands of years of conflict. Now, I don't want to go through all of that conflict and claim any kind of victimhood or anything like that, but it's something that even in the lifetime of my parents and still now touches the very fabric of our society there. The culture, the state, the rule of law. France, we see now, is just, I mean, some people I've heard from have said that everything is normal and it's being blown out of proportion. But there are still things being burnt and conflict between police and it's really incredible scenes. I mean, just the last week we were talking about the conflict in Russia, but we use that more as an example of how in 24 hours it went straight from revolution to everything was fine. Here in France, it's been 4 days, and every night it just looks like a war zone, and it doesn't look like the president can hold any longer his state very easily together. It's a bit of a problem because a leader like Macron, and I'm going to single him out, why not? A leader like Macron has done many unpopular things that have not been based on popular vote. And if we look in the past, many, even the Gilets jaunes or other protests have come forward against many of his forced executive powers being thrusted upon people. And this is the same with many other leaders, whether you're looking Canada with Trudeau, or Ardern in New Zealand, or at the time, I suppose it was Theresa May in the UK, and now Sunak, Biden, give me any kind of Putin, Xi, any of these world leaders have this same problem with their governments to varying degrees. But the whole thing I'm trying to say here is that leaders, especially through things like deep state events, as Peter Dale Scott calls them, deep events, things like 9/11 or COVID, these mass emergencies that are worldwide, kick into power all these changes to the law. And often emergency powers mean shortcuts are taken. You know, we chop those rights up and we steamroll and we speed things up so that we can get things through much quicker. That's the idea. The idea is, in an emergency, you don't have time to maybe sit down 100 members to vote and, you know, communicate, and sometimes you just have to make things happen. I agree with that, but at the same time, there shouldn't be this mass secrecy for some people, and then for the rest of us, just, well, whatever happens to be their decision. We're not cannon fodder and cattle. we need to be informed and involved in some kind of way, and there needs to be some kind of limited interaction and accountability to the public, because that's the whole reason that militaries and governments exist, because we pay their taxes and we fund their enterprises. I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, but the whole point of this is that if we don't have control of this military and political mechanism, it will and is running away with us and making decisions that we have no access to, is really what I'm trying to say. And for me, this topic gets really visceral in its fullest sense, because I'd like to talk to you about the context of unrest from a few documents that we've even looked at before. The first one I'm going to jump into is a good old favorite. We come to it every now and again. This is talking about the Council of Rome, which is the foreign arm of it's basically the foreign policy arm of the Bilderbergs. And we kind of went through that in a previous story time, so do have a look at that. But this is a CIA document that was written up giving a bit of a history about this small group of people that have this agenda of globalism and societal unrest through forcing people together and in certain ways, and you know how globalists want a globalist, right? That sort of thing. And it's an interesting read because it does have some historical grounding to it. And as I said, in this case here, it deals specifically with Italy. I want to go over it so that we really kind of frame what these people are in some sense capable of and what they push upon us. So let's see if I can get the text. Here we go. Now, you'll see here Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. Now, he's given many talks and stuff, so you can see him speak and all kinds of things. But this is an interesting read for a few reasons. Number one, because even if it is not true, there are some facts in it, some historical facts. So already there is some merit in kind of going through those accounts and making your own assessments of them, because really there is some very fascinating information, even if you don't want to get too deep into this pond. And it's not just a pond, it's a deep, deep ocean, this one. But essentially, the story is about a small group of shady individuals form this cabal that, through the international mechanisms that control states, have access to the people and their laws, so that they can get a global agenda across. And this global agenda obviously is not favorable to the people. It's not like, well, if you go through some hardship, if you eat the bugs and you live in the pods, then you'll be fine. No, it's pretty much, pretty much the Georgia Guidestones. We call that up. Georgia. The Georgia Guidestones. Now, these were recently blown up. Can you believe it? And I say that sarcastically because one of the things on the Georgia Guidestones it's a list of things that humanity should follow, kind of like a 10 Commandments kind of thing. And one of the major issues I have with one of them, at least, because some of them seem pretty good, keep a balance with nature and all these things. One of them says basically keep the population to about 500 million. Now, let's see if we can call that text up somewhere. Okay, so maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Okay, now I'm for that whole perpetual balance with nature, but 500 million is like, where did we get that number? I mean, if we can use clean technology and positively use nature to make better living environments, there is space for everyone. Of course, we need to be cognizant of that balance, but 500, where does this number come from? No wonder they blew the stupid thing up. That's quite a smack in the face. Now, going back to John Coleman. John Coleman's story of the Committee of 300 is basically about this global conspiracy of 300 people, Club of Rome, that as an arm of foreign policy basically twist political culture in any country they choose in whatever way they see fit, violently or otherwise. And Italy has a little spot in this story here. And I want to go through this because this will lead us very squarely into Project Gladio, Operation Gladio, as it were. So, I'm not going to read you the whole 169 pages of the Committee of 300. I'm just going to jump to the section dealing with the then Prime Minister of Italy, good old Aldo Moro. Now, Aldo Moro, was a real person. It's not like some it's not just some any other thing. Let's just try that again, shall we? So, sorry, let me try that again. Aldo Moro was a legitimate historical figure. Aldo Romeo Luigi Moro was an Italian statesman and prominent member of the Christian democracy. He served as Prime Minister of Italy from December 1963 to 1968, and then again from 74 to 76. So, a prominent and popular figure in Italian politics, whatever you may think of him, okay? Now, he was kidnapped. Not only was he kidnapped, but the Red Brigades murdered him, okay? Now, that's a Wikipedia article you can go read about if you want to get the full grasp of the story, because it's just mind-blowing. But isn't it funny that it is mentioned in the John Coleman story? Okay, so let's hear what John Coleman has to say instead of Wikipedia. We often look at Wikipedia, and you can do that yourselves. But and again, I'm not saying this is fact, all of it. Take of it the pieces you need. But let's go forward. It says, let's talk about actual cases in history. The attempt to communize and deindustrialize Italy. The Committee of 300 long ago decreed that there shall be a smaller, much smaller and better world. That is, their idea of what constitutes a better world. The myriads of useless eaters, that's you and me, apparently, consuming scarce natural resources, were to be culled. Industrial progress supports population growth, therefore the command to multiply and subdue the earth, found in Genesis, had to be subverted. This called for an attack upon Christianity. At the time, you must understand, guys, I'm just now interceding here my own thoughts. I just want to make this clear. Although he's talking about Christianity here, you must understand that this is a person who themselves is from the West and recognizes, well, not recognizes, but I guess looks at the world through the lens of Christianity being one of the civilizing forces of history. So Christianity has that like greater political, cultural meaning in this sense. It's not strictly religious. I just wanted to make that clear. But just moving forward, he says that this called for an attack upon Christianity with a capital C. The slow but disintegration of industrial nations, the destruction of hundreds of millions of people, referred to by the Committee of 300 as surplus population, and the removal of any leader who dared to stand in the way of the committee's global planning to reach the foregoing objectives. Now, he goes into more here. He says, two of the committee's earliest targets were Italy and Pakistan. The late Aldo Moro, Prime Minister of Italy, was one leader who opposed zero growth and population restrictions planned for his country, thereby incurring the wrath of the Club of Rome, commissioned by the Olympians. The Olympians are these few people that see themselves as the custodians of the human future. They are all knowing and wise and rich and powerful and decide for us, with or without laws, apparently. So this was commissioned by the Olympians to carry out its policies in this regard. In a Rome courtroom on November 10th in 1982, a close friend of Moro's testified that the former Prime Minister was threatened by an agent of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That is the RIIA. We've spoken about them before and their psychological operations. And mentioned that this is a person who is also a Committee of 300 member, while he was still US Secretary of State. The meteoric rise of the man, the witness named as Kissinger. Now, that's very interesting. We know that Kissinger has had great influence in American foreign policy. Often foreign policy is dealing with deconstructing unfriendly states and constructing relationships with friendly states. And there are different ways to kind of force that on a person if they don't see it your way. In Africa, we call that a rhino's bargain. Not in all of Africa, but in some parts. A rhino's bargain is basically what the mafia would call an offer you can't refuse. It's a rhino's bargain. You can't say no. You just accept it. And so, let's go a little bit further here. It will be recalled that Prime Minister Moro was kidnapped by the Red Brigades in 1978 and subsequently and brutally shot to death. It was at the trial of the members of the Red Brigades that several of them testified to the fact that they knew of the high-level US involvement in the plot to kill Moro. When threatening Moro, Kissinger was obviously not carrying out US foreign policy, but rather acting in accordance to the instructions received from the Club of Rome, which is the foreign policy arm of the Committee of 300. Now, that is quite a chunk to take. But if you don't believe that, it goes further. Because what gives a little bit of credence to this allegation, I mean, that did go through the Italian court, so there is something there. There is, in a certain sense, a conspiracy that completely followed with dealing with the kidnap of a prime minister and then his execution. It's mind-blowing stuff to even contemplate. But this concept that there are higher forces that control the state. So here you have Italy trying to do what it needs to do, zero population growth. It's trying to make sure that the populace can grow and flourish and children can fill the schools and be educated to come into the workforce. And Italy's trying to, go forward. And here comes some other intelligence agencies and international cabals, and they torpedo the whole thing. No problem. Whoever gets involved, it's not a stress at all. And we see this again through something like the state of tension. Now, the state of tension was basically a strategy used by the collective West, led by the United States, against different countries in Europe. Because in the 70s, well, 60s and 70s and 80s, communism was waxing and waning. In some places it was getting popularity, in other places it was losing a lot of popularity. And there was a lot of shift, and many countries wanted to be more autonomous, more sovereign, have their own freedom to decide their outcomes. Very nationalistic in some regard. In the good way, sometimes. But basically, that doesn't suit the agenda of things like the Council of Foreign Relations or other large international organizations. For example, you'll see many countries were lambasted if they did not follow the policy given to us by the CDC and the World Health Organization during the corona op. I mean, I'm just going to call it an op at the moment because it's still unfolding, let it be known. Moving forward, it's through the information that we obtain about this state of tension in Europe that we uncover things like Operation Gladio. Now, again, when we're talking about this state of tension, what it's talking about there is putting pressure on European states militarily through covert means so that they are more inclined to join the Pax Americana, come under the wing of the security that the United States and its allies would offer. So something like Operation Gladio then is one of those things that happened from the many umbrella events of this state of tension. And Operation Gladio, we've looked at it before, and I remember the Wikipedia article saying that it was like complete bunk conspiracy. But there's been a lot of reporting that's come out even now, recently. My favorite of which is the Grey Zone just did an absolutely fantastic expose of the matter. Although what they were looking at more was the British involvement and how the involvement of MI6, which is the foreign arm of British intelligence, along with NATO and the CIA, created this very dark world of incredible violence, literally setting off bombs and torturing people and arming factions and working with mobsters. It was, it was a complete mad circus, all under the auspices of national security because they believed they were in a state of war, Cold War, with the Soviets at the time. And so, again, the ends justify the means, and I'm here to remind them that it doesn't. There is a balance that you must have there. You cannot treat people like animals. We are human beings, and our lives are extremely precious, and our ability to know is incredibly boundless. They have no rights to talk for us and act for us in this capacity when they're doing illegal things beyond our mandates. That is what I'm saying. Now, I want to talk about this Operation Gladio. And as I said, the Grey Zone did an excellent expose. Let's bring that up on screen, shall we? And they bring in the MI6 British intelligence side. Now, obviously, I completely encourage you guys to look at Kit Clarenberg's article. As I said, this was published just recently, June 2019. Yeah, I only just read it now, but so much information to take. The world is changing so rather rapidly. So let's read a little bit together here, shall we? It says, the newly declassified British shed... Oh, sorry, I was zooming in there at the same time. Let's try that again, shall we? The newly declassified British files shed disturbing light on the origins and internal workings of Operation Gladio, a covert NATO plot deploying fascist terror militias across Italy. Have spies in London applied these lessons in the Ukraine as well? Are they applying them now in France? Are they applying them now in Belgium? Are they applying them, or have they applied them to other European countries? And the answer is yes, very much so. And there comes that big word, NATO. Now, I'm not here to take sides, but I am here to point out that if you think that NATO does not have international operations because it itself, let me just remind you, is an international organization, then I got, declassified British file to sell you. My whole point here is that with these international operations, because of the supranational level of them, whether it's the EU and now NATO, where is that chain of command? And is everyone on the political stream informed? Coming downstream of that information, are civilians able to make any kind of decision on how their militaries are going to behave? Answer doesn't seem to be positive. Now, Operation Gladio, let's look a little bit deeper into that, because as I said, it was a whole chain of deeply illegal things that they did to terrorize people, civilians, and therefore the governments, because they're the ones that vote and change the landscape of the political reality of whatever country they're applying these things to. It's the people that basically vote and make laws and change laws and things like that. So if you control and affect the people, then you control and affect the laws and the governments and all these good things. The top-down, whole top-down thing. Now, let me just see if I can pull up the rest of this for you. Just give me a sec. So, as I said, Operation Gladio, here we go. Now, I'm going to pull this from the Wikispooks because the Wikipedia article, I'm sure I've got it here somewhere. Wikispooks just has, it kind of cuts out a bit of the BS. There's been so much research into this that you can't really take all of Wikipedia's article hook, line, and sinker. You have to divide it up a little bit. And this is a bit more connected, and it explains a lot more on the modern international front. So it says here, Operation Gladio is a NATO-backed paramilitary network established in World War II. Now, these were supposed to be stay-behind forces, cells, as it were, secret cells that, even though they might have become occupied, they could be activated at any moment to perform paramilitary operations. And it says here, so it's also called the Stay-Behind Network. Since if the Red Army invaded Europe, its members would stay behind enemy lines to disrupt the Soviet control. Officially non-existent, and again, the Grey Zone, I think, just blew that out the water through Kit Clarenberg. Secrecy was so extreme that these networks were hard for NATO MI6 deep state officials to control. Gladio was responsible for bombings, kidnappings, assassinations, to such an extent that the network was publicly exposed in Italy in the 1980s and was subject to a BBC documentary. The project was adopted in the mid-1990s as Gladio B, using Muslim terrorists as a substitute enemy. Now, where have we heard that narrative before? I'll put up the Wikipedia article as I talk a little bit about this. But really what the story is here is because of the secrecy and because the fact that a military sees everything as a target, they leave cells of these military personnel that wait to be occupied or go behind enemy lines as influence spreads or whatever, and they're there to disrupt the enemy. Disrupting the enemy in this sense, because of the secrecy, they lose control they lose control of it. And what does a military do? It blows and shoots things up. That's what happened, you know, the Geneva train station and all kinds of things here were really violent acts of terrorism. And although only maybe subsidiarily and maybe secretly connected to these operations, nonetheless, this is where they get these explosives and these weapons and these training and this all kinds of things. And people don't know about it. Governments don't know about it. The secrecy is higher than that of your own country. So even if a president comes in, it's very difficult for them to know, oh, what is the global response that, you know, NATO has to this whole endeavor for this such and such. This is why emergency powers are so dangerous. They feel that they can cut corners and make decisions that we haven't even discussed, you know. We don't even know what's on their minds in some cases. Now, the Wikipedia article about Operation Gladio was the codename for a clandestine stay-behind operation organized by the Western Union and subsequently by NATO and the CIA. Oh, so you can see now they basically say that straight up. Before it was unofficial. Now it's official. Here you go. Good old StoryTime, able to track this madness. Anyways, let's move forward. The operation was designed for a potential Warsaw Pact invasion and conquest of Europe. Although Gladio specifically refers to the Italian branch of the NATO stay-behind organizations, Operation Gladio is also used as an informal name for all of them, because, as I say, they didn't just... I was gonna swear there. They didn't just violently rape Italy. They did that to all the countries of Europe and all the South American countries. And if you think Southeast Asia and Middle East and other places have been spared, it's difficult. Mr. Beanie Man, I'm going to come join you just now. Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit about an hour 20 on our program, and I just want to welcome you all because we're getting into some really deep stuff here. This is, you know, StoryTime 16 is really going deep. This is a very important topic to kind of understand what is happening in society now. When you see violent unrest in your media sphere, whatever kind of area of life you are aware of, and you begin to see riots where the police begin to lose control and governments have to call in emergency powers, we, as much as we need to help people who are in emergencies and act effectively, because governments and militaries cut corners and they are incredibly evil in many cases, have to also be extremely cautious, and we have to scrutinize very carefully what their agendas are and how they're doing this planning. Because you see here in Operation Gladio, I mean, they were just doing completely illegal things, and half the time they could say, oh, it wasn't us, we didn't know anything about it, because these are secret cells, maybe a generation or two, you know, sleeper cells. And, you know, who are they? Why are they doing this? We don't know. We kind of do because we, you know, gave them the weapons and the training and just pushed them in the right direction. You know, but the plausible deniability doesn't absolve them from the moral responsibility of trying to change various countries through military means that are covert. Absolutely not. That's why emergency governments and continuation of government has to be put in check and balance. So this is Operation Gladio, and this is the concept of continuation of government. And why this is coming up in the context of civil unrest is because that story of the 300 also brings out very clearly, this is the second half of our program, what we're going to deal with and wrap up on, is this belief that these elites have that we are not worthy to have any kind of control of our future. We must just believe that what they're doing is for the greater good. They see themselves as so... I almost don't know how to describe it. It's kind of the way I can imagine it when I try to channel what it must be to be one of these internationalist, globalist, beyond the laws of civilian understanding, kind of super evil decision makers. If I try to put myself in their shoes, I could totally see how a narcissist like that and a sociopath like that would think that they have the right to keep this information from everyone because they studied or they went through the military or they, they'll justify it however they wish, but they'll think to themselves that they were chosen for that information, and so they have some kind of divine right to make plans for the rest of the world, and not how it works. Not at all. So, again, Operation Gladio, continuation of government, civil unrest. That was the first half of StoryTime 16. The second half now is we're going to look a little bit deeper now at this whole concept of the UAP and other emergency powers and things like that. Because in there is a lot of corruption. As I pointed out, like with Operation Gladio and the incredibly terrible, violent things that they were doing, these things have political effect. And so it's important for us to now look like what's on the other side of that. What do we do with this information, knowing the capabilities of these people in this incredibly destructive way? Now, first things first, we spoke about how regime change is just another word thrown around today. But I'm here to remind you that that is often done covertly, clandestinely, and that means illegally. If they caught, Geneva Convention is not supposed to protect them. And that's the whole point of a covert operation. So looking at the kind of unrest that we've had recently, whether it's in any country of the world because of government forces pushing us in one or other direction, remember that emergency powers they're the trigger. What we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. When you get messages that there could be this or that emergency, or that you need this and that digital thing to travel because it's for your own good and for your own safety, you got to also know that half the reason they're doing that is because the control system is really what's important. The control system is what allows this breakaway part of the government and the military to act with impunity, basically cutting corners on rights and creating wars, destroying political adversaries in whatever way, shape, or form they desire. A really runaway, rogue, deadly force. So this is why we have a lot of upheaval in the world today. And, we've said in many programs prior, talking about misinformation, disinformation, this is all part of counterintelligence and intelligence. You cannot separate the two. And this is the kind of fifth generation warfare that we find ourselves in. So whilst there are very kinetic forms of attacking a foreign country, even through not only, let's say, one country to another, but something like a NATO attacking its own countries or countries that are not in line with its objectives, you get forces that are national and supranational that try and steer us. And to do that, the public has to be malleable to that information. Because if you just up and start a revolution, a lot of people will see it for what it is and resist that accordingly. But if you confuse them, if you divide them, if you make them think that the cause of this emergency is their fault or it's just something natural, not what it seems, if you can control the narrative, then you can push these laws further and further and cut more corners. I want to bring our attention quickly because, Operation Gladio, as I said, just this month, actually I suppose we're now in July, welcome everyone to the 2nd, but just in June, we saw that Operation Gladio is now confirmed as an MI6 CIA NATO operation to create very violent tension so that the governments at the time would fall in line with Western hegemony to then counter the Soviets or China or whatever they want. But I want to bring our attention to this document here. This can also be found in the CIA vaults. It's been freedom of information requested. This one in particular came from the Black Vault, and it is The Evolution of Strategic Influence by Lieutenant Susan L. Goch. And this is kind of like an academic paper that passes through the military. And it's very technical, although it's only 62 pages, which for me is not too much, but it is very technical. So I'm not going to go through all of it because it tracks a huge history of how perception is managed throughout various phases of political reality. So for example, here you've got World War II, the early Cold War, middle Cold War, the Reagan and beyond. I want to go right to the end, straight to modern day closing notes on this, just to frame this idea about this fifth generation information warfare that we're kind of suffering, because on the one hand you get physical push from these global cabals. As I said, it's a bit of a diffuse group of people that vie for power, so difficult to outline who's good and who's bad. But at the same time, there's also this psychological attempt at changing societies from the inside out. And let's see, let me zap down to the bottom here so that we have a little bit more clearer to focus on. Okay, so now this whole document tracks the history of how they feel that it's justified for psychological operations to control the battlefield space. They see it as a tool, in other words, a weapon that can be used defensively. In other words, let's say you may need to, like in Vietnam, we discover they had to bomb not only in Vietnam, but in Laos and neighboring countries to try and get some of the enemy that would scatter across the border. And that's an international attack on another country that you're not at war with. So highly illegal. We discover this much later. But this is the kind of stuff that they'll do whenever they want for the justification of national security. And they believe that if you can control the public's perception of these things, it makes it easier to work. So defensively, in the sense that if you do something bad, you can distance yourself from it or control that narrative so it doesn't affect you politically or your administration's ability to do whatever it wants, or the military's ability to make money, let's just say. But it can also be used offensively in terms of counterintelligence. We've looked at this before, how many people who have come across or close to unpopular truths or dangerous truths, as the CIA sometimes refer to them as, they end up in very precarious and strange deaths. And we looked, for example, just last episode in StoryTime 15, which you can find on YouTube at the Prime Matter podcast. We looked at Saarbacher, and he was the guy that gave us the full accounts of the UFO file. And then one day he kind of goes to his car and he finds he touches his door handle and there's a weird jelly clear substance on it. And he wipes it off and, goes back to work. And half an hour later, he's calling his son saying, I feel terrible. I think I've been poisoned, and gets to hospital, and there you go. So that was the year the movie came out of the information that he brought forward about the UFO file, which we now see is. This is a point I want to just make, because as we touch along psychological operations and we bring this UFO file question back into focus, just remember that the UFO file here is important because it's the highest level of secrecy. It's going to come under the most effective forms of military expertise. So that will be the thing that will most likely be the deepest hidden and the most violently defended. And that's why now that it's all coming out in a certain sense, whether you think of the disclosure right now as a psyop or some kind of real endeavor by civilians and the government to try and rein in these unacknowledged special access programs, however you see that, there is a big tussle for this secrecy, for this technology. And in fact, in the Grush episode, he even says that the thing that is most shocking to him, in a certain sense, is not the aliens. It's the fact that we've had this technology that's had potent, clean energy that could power every third world country and the West forever without any problems. You know, these 0-point energy systems or whatever the case is. These things here would completely overnight change our need for fossil fuels, for wars of oil, for currency wars and things like that. It's incredible how overnight the whole world would change just because of this thing. Now, whilst they've had the opportunity to slowly phase us into this technology, what they've done is actually just kept it all for themselves because it's the military, and so they think it's the ace up their sleeves in case of a war. They try make sure that that information never gets out. And now that we're understanding that these new possibilities are coming to us, like incredible energy systems and possible other intelligences from other realms, we need clear information. We don't need psyops, but this is the kind of stuff that we are left with. Let's read a little bit further, because this is like how the military thinks that they have the right to this information coordination for the masses. Now, this lady here says, the Bush administration needs to articulate a national psychological strategy, a strategy that is broad and encompassing as the containment strategy of the Cold War. Now remember, Operation Gladio that we just spoke about was part of that Cold War NATO clandestine military stuff. And it says the nuclear threat combined with other weapons of mass destruction is as imminent today as ever, and the threat of another attack like September 11th is even greater. But now many of the political perpetrators are not state actors. I want to stop there for a second. September 11th has been marked by even astute academics like Dr. Peter Dale Scott as a deep event that is marred in unanswered questions. It is the modern day JFK situation for our time. It is something that, what happened to World Trade Center 7? I mean, you're going to tell me what, another structural failure from some random fire? There are many questions that were not answered and have still persisted to this day, and the kind of information that we're discovering. I mean, just this year, if you think like, oh, but conspiracy theory, you know, goes a long way, I'm telling you, we'll have a look at the gray zone again.
All right, let's turn to some actual journalism. Here is the latest from the gray zone. Here's the headline: bombshell filing, 9/11 hijackers were CIA recruits.
So now we discover, oh, whoops, actually some of them had funding and training and were helped, and some agencies didn't tell other agencies about these possible informants, but then they turned out to be double agents and stab America in the back. It's the intelligence agencies and the militaries are rampantly forming our own perception. They're rampantly changing our very perception of history. At least they're trying to. And they justify it by nuclear weapons and mass destruction, this and mass destruction that, but there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. September 11th is not a closed case, in my opinion. So again, they're not interested in the events here. They are interested in the perception management. They want to see how you are able to swallow this information or not. So, just as in the Cold War, the US must use all elements of national power to deter the use of weapons of mass destruction. Strategic influence, as defined in the beginning of this paper, will be key to success. So strategic influence means whatever kind of psychological operation or modern information weapon you want to use. Persuasive information alone will not be sufficient. Messages must be backed up by action, or they will never be ineffectual. Sorry. What she means there is, if they want the information to seem persuasive, it can't just be words. It has to be backed by something. Nowadays, with generative AI technology and pictures and videos that can be generated digitally, it's going to become more and more difficult to really get a deep understanding of the truth, but we must try. But in this case here, there's not only that is a problem, but the fact that they control media, they control parts of government, they control entire world systems like the World Economic Forum, Council of Foreign Relations, which actually doesn't have political grounding, but it has leaders of the whole world that meet there, So there is executive power that is concentrated there. And I just want to mention lastly, talking about this idea of being psychologically operated on, and I want to link that back to continuation of government in just a moment, but let's just finish reading here. Reagan's NSP 130 provides a starting model, although it needs to be updated. As one writer put it, the NSD 130 should be dusted off and made required reading throughout the executive and legislative branches. This landmark document established the international information as a major instrument of national security policy and the responsibility of no single agency of the government. That's dangerous. That means that they're thinking about creating a narrative at levels that are international beyond the borders to push an agenda on the rest of the world and internally as well. But they also say that it should be no single responsibility of one agency, and in some sense that does say, okay, well then there's, decentralization, and so that's better for security. It also means that you've got problems like the CIA, where it's got its own air force, it's got its own army, it's got its own funding, it can do international operations like we spoke about last story time, about like the Bay of Pigs. They want to go in and train some people to go and invade a foreign country and make it seem like it was disgruntled insurgents. They can do that, and the president will find out about it as it's happening and try and wangle that, as Kennedy did. It's these intelligence services should just not have that kind of power beyond their borders and should not be performing those kinds of operations internally. It was once illegal, but as information has become kind of a groundbreaking sphere or a domain of warfare, it's a bit of a losing battle sometimes. Now, as I said, psychological operations tie into continuation of government and the breakaway governments, because you can see that repeating theme of a group of people that are not accountable to the law, think of them higher than the average person, have their own ideas about how the future is supposed to go forward, and have real powers to do that in the most secret ways, and then they just cover it with this magic wand of national security, which goes to some extent, yes, but then you cannot stretch it beyond a certain point. Then it's illegal. You cannot take it beyond the mandate of Constitution and the Bill of Rights, in my opinion. So this is the heavy topic that we've dealt with this evening. We see that the continuation of government, the head of the continuation of government, in this case for NORAD, has now shuffled across to Gilot, And that's come through a tension between Space Command and NORAD and the changing powers that Biden has given. We see how these kinds of psychological operations are linked as well to continuation of government and militaries that have plans that are supranational, above the nation state. You think your country is just doing what your country does? No, it's involved in a much bigger tangle, and this can sometimes be very dangerous because one match can set off the entire warehouse of fireworks, in a sense. Sovereignty is seen these days by these globalists as a archaic, foreign, then thing, an artifact, a political artifact from another time. And I'm not too sure I agree. It still seems natural for people to have a strong connection to where they are born and where they are raised, and they work that land, or they bring some kind of benefit to that area, and hopefully that nourishes them and gives them some kind of connection to that place to want to proceed and take pride in it. Without that, what you end up with is the kind of civil unrest you're seeing in France at the moment, when there's no grounding and appreciation for the space that you occupy and the people that make that space what it is. So is that a natural phenomena, a lot of these unrests and attacks and things like that, or is it some other kind of clandestine operation? We have to be careful, because as we've shown in StoryTime 16, this can very much be the case. And that same theme again of people who are not accountable, doing secret operations, thinking that they are the bee's knees, the Olympians, the ones that can decide the future of humanity, is an unacceptable framework for the rest of the billions of people that are just trying to have peaceful coexistence with our planet and our brethren. I guess this is also why we're seeing such an attack on children and vulnerable sections of our society. Again, divide and conquer, and to change and twist the mind of people to accept what they previously wouldn't, and what degenerates their culture and eventually creates a more malleable society to push whatever agenda you want onto. These are the things we have to worry about. And so, there is a deep link here as well to the UFO file. As I said, just recently, Grush has said that there are more people coming forward. There are recovery operations. There's been hit jobs by the government, possibly. And that there might be accordances with other races of beings from another planet. And there might be wars or politics or, mind-bending claims. And again, do we take this as a natural phenomena, or is this another psyop? We need to discern very, very carefully about what that means. And really, even though there is like a political level that, is the forest that we're kind of inside of, we don't often see the sky above it because the canopy is so thick. We'll see that, for example, in the context of the United States, when you see a senator like Senator Gillibrand and Rubio, who are one Democrat, one Republican, trying to bring forward UFO or UAP hearings and disclosure and all these kinds of things, it seems like a bipartisan event that one could get behind and be like, oh yeah, our senators are finally doing something. It's it's not a political thing. It's both left and right, and they're trying to bring forward disclosure. But again, remember that this disclosure comes at a price. They can only disclose these things if they are read into certain programs, and if they see it the way the military can trust them with national secrets, then they get access to certain things. That's why we started with that clip of one senator saying to another, if you want to talk about continuation of government, that's great. Maybe we can make a special private council session, and then we can see if you have the need to know to even be a part of that meeting. So we don't need this compartmentalized business It's not good for us. And even senators that are trying to push forward bipartisan legislature do seem like a good kick in the right direction. I'm not going to, knock that. But at the same time, is this who we're trusting for the truth? Because remember, governments are not perfect beings. They should be there to provide just the very basics of necessity and information so that we can make decisions for ourselves. And I say this because where I want to end this StoryTime 16 on is this message. Things are about to get really wild. And I say this not lightly. It's not something I want to happen. And what I mean by wild is simply, again, the pressures that we are seeing of one force of government that has no restriction, or thinks it has no restriction and no mandate in its own moral ethics, is trying to push us in one direction, and the rest of humanity is trying to have a normal life. And so this tension brings out often a lot of the problems that we face. And if we are inundated with all this psyop information, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, it's all low quality crap. What we need is wisdom, not just knowledge. We do need high quality information, but we need to know how to think about stuff correctly. And this is really where I want to end Storytime 6, is just to remind everyone, just to make it very, very clear, amongst the terrible things that governments and militaries do to control your mind and change your politics and shepherd your future into something that they obscurely think is the correct direction for humanity, just know that you are a completely autonomous and real agent in that equation. In this system, you come first, not them. If there were no people in this world, basically the aeroplanes don't fly and the missiles don't blow things up and nobody does anything bad. It's only people that choose to do those things. And many of us are good people. And we should remember that that is really what's kept society and civilization moving forward as stably as it could to the point that we find ourselves. And we have to keep fighting that fight. And we do this not by being blasted by this information that makes us dizzy with, oh, how do we understand this? And how do we act about this and that threat? And everything seems dismal and, such a black pill, whatever the case is. Don't be disheartened, because although there are challenges, and the human race has come across many, many challenges in its existence, I'm here to kind of remind you all that the answer has been with us always, and that's what they're trying to distract you from. And simply the answer being that within you, having a good understanding, good grounding, that universal rule of be good, do good, that connects you with people, that connects you with nature, that connects you with reality, and that makes these problems at the right distance. If you're focused primarily on just the basics that you need to be a good person and have a good life, things like nukes and electronic surveillance and reconnaissance platforms and cyber warfare, it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary. It's only because I make a threat, so you make a threat, so we can counter each other's threats, and then we need to upgrade them, that we start having these arms races. Most people, we just want to chill. We just want to listen to good music, meet cool people, have families, and see what the world has to offer. Instead, we are being caged further and further. So remember, you're not a victim. That's what they would like you to think. What you need to do is just take a deep breath, connect with those good things in your life, and start at the bottom. Just the basics. Keeping good people around you, doing good things in the world, enjoying reality. That's really what they don't want. They don't want a person who's clear in their thinking, connected to their community, and able to think in a critical manner. It doesn't seem like much, but really this is the biggest pushback you can have against these kinds of operations, because that's how we not only discover the kinds of attempts that they make to influence us, but it's also how we uncover the secrets to then reject them outright. I saw a clip recently about some federal agents in, I suppose they're not federal because in that country they don't have states as it were, they've got provinces, but these government agents that were trying to infiltrate protests, and the protesters were like, why are you trying to instigate this kind of belief that we're trying to be peaceful, we're trying to just make our message heard? And they immediately discover that these people are infiltrators, and it clicks that, oh, that explains why they're all masked and acting funny, and they immediately get their masks pulled off by the crowd, and these operatives just run because if they get ID'd, then they can't be used in future operations unless they remain masked. They can't do clandestine stuff. Their face can now be recognized, and so that botches some of their ability to perform secret operations. And that's, for me, an interesting thought. Just this fact that the truth is what makes these people and these agencies scatter. Anything that is trying to harm you, if you understand how it works, you also then understand how to manipulate it so that you can succeed and advance. If it's too hot, you understand, water cools you down. If it's too cold, you understand that a fire will keep you alive for the night or something like that. We adapt, but if we know what the threat is. Therefore, blessings to you all, and keep your head on a swivel, and keep close to you people that are good and have your interests in heart as you have theirs. That's the only currency that's really worth anything. There's no manual about how you are to be a human on this planet. As long as you eat and drink and be merry and share that merriment for the betterment of everyone. That universal rule of do good, be good. Consideration is also a good universal rule. Everyone just follow that basic thing. Everything on top of that is fluff. It's artificial. There's no book that says we must have everything from that point on. Nature defines that we just need to blossom into whatever amazing beings we choose to become. So keep that as your focus instead of all the chaos that's kind of unfolding, because this will accelerate. We've, as humans, lived in very violent times, and we've been very fortunate in the modern era to have, at least since World War II, kind of quelled mass violence and, just the unhinging of the rule of law. And I hope we don't go too deep down that road, but it's not uncommon for there to be an acceleration of a carefully built house of cards. You hit one and then a lot of pieces of it begin to crumble like a domino effect. So that will happen inadvertently as these forces clash and as truth comes across all these various lies. We have choices to make, and we don't have to get too caught up in it. We just have to be good people, think as clearly as we can, and do things like share this podcast and these conversations, and try and find a good grip on just what it means to be a human, so that no matter what the world throws at us, good or bad, alien invasion, asteroids, military industrial complex takeover by globalists, whatever the case is, you want to be the best version of yourself that you can be, with the clearest mindset and the best cohesion with other people around you. And that's really the message I wanted to bring forward amongst all the dark stuff that we've touched across on episode 16 of Storytime. So again, just much love to you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Mr. Beanie, we'll catch you all very soon as well. Definitely Rust is an interesting game to think about, that state of nature that we are trying to move away from. The battle of all versus all, as the mystery schools talk about, is not the direction we're trying to bring our existence to. We're trying to grow humanity into something positive, not destroy it. So we must stop those that do, call them out for what they are, keep the truth as our primary weapon to power. And it's with that that I end this broadcast. Love you all long time. Have a great week following forward. A big shout out to Paul. Exciting news for everyone, I'm sure. And just want to say, yeah, special person in my life, Yomi. We'll chat to you very, very soon. And to everyone else, we'll catch you next week. For any emails you want to send me, you can do that at the Prime Matter Podcast at gmail.com. We'll be putting this up on YouTube if you missed bits and pieces or you want to run over some of the information we've gone through. That'll be put up there as well. And as always, I appreciate your feedback and this dialogue that we have. It's great that other people will bring up topics that will be shared with other people. So we're always going to try and make this a much better experience for you. We love your comments, queries, questions, and just, you know, positive criticism. It's really great. We thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Have a good one. We'll see you at the next turn of Storytime. Enjoy.